the scribe, the rebel, and the sword. This is the reading of the book, The Scribe, the Rebel, and the Sword. These are the words of Enoch, the testimony of the flesh. They did not fall by gravity. They descended by choice. For 5,000 years, the Book of Enoch has been a secret kept in the margins of history, a jagged, forbidden record of the moment reality began to leak. This is a visceral rewrite of that ancient testimony, stripped of its dusty academic layers and returned to the dirt and the grit of the Bronze Age. It is the story of a world that broke at the seams, of a scribe who noticed the stars shifting, a rebel who traded the high silence for the intoxicating ache of a human heart, and a sword drawn to scour the earth of their beautiful terminal error. This is the history they couldn't bury deep enough. This is the testimony of the flesh.
Chapter 4. The Hunger That Grew.
The earth has submitted its secondary filing. We have received it in the manner we receive all things, without urgency, without surprise. We had read this filing before the earth had silt to write with. The blood is crossing its threshold. The variables we required are now before us. We have been measuring the western wall, the precise line of it, the angle of the load, the depth of the hairline that does not yet exist, and that we are beginning to consider placing. We are not impatient. We do not require impatience. The basin is where the mathematics points. We are at the narrowing end of a calculation that was always going to narrow here.
1. The world was running several wrong things at once now. This was new. In the autumn, he had recorded single anomalies: the light at 1 hour, the rain on 2 mornings, the star cluster off its position. One wrong thing, then a pause, then another. The world producing its errors with a kind of consideration, a pause between them, as if each required composing before the next. Now there was no pause. Enoch pressed his hands flat on the shelf. The stone was cool. That was right. He let himself feel the grit of the clay dust in the stone's grain, the small chip at the near corner, the particular solidity of the thing. He was grounding himself, and he knew he was grounding himself, and the knowing did not make it less necessary. The bread at the market had gone to mold before the buyer had carried it home. He had been standing 2 stalls away when this happened. The woman examining the loaf in her hands. And then she was standing with a handful of mold. He had written this down. 2 doors from the market, an oil lamp had been lit in the ordinary way and had produced twice the light it should for the span of 5 breaths, then returned to itself. He had not been present for the lamp, but 3 people told him about it, and their accounts agreed on all but the number of breaths, which was the kind of detail witnesses always disagreed on, and which he considered irrelevant to the fact. He had written that down too. And then at his bench, in the ordinary daylight of mid-morning, with the high window putting its light on the wall at the correct angle, and the market sounds coming through the clay, as they always did, and Edna in the courtyard doing whatever Edna was doing, at his bench, in the ordinary daylight, something moved at the edge of his vision. He looked. Nothing was there. He looked at the wall. He looked at the doorway. He looked at the corner to his left, where the spare reed bundles stood against the plaster. He looked at each of these things with the full attention he brought to a discrepant record, and each of them was entirely as it should be. He picked up his reed. He pressed. Something moved at the edge of my vision while I was at the bench, to the left. I looked and there was no one. He covered his clay. He pressed his hands flat on the stone again. The grit, the chip, the cool of it at this hour, which never varied, which was always right. He did not tell Edna. There was a kind of protection that operated through silence, and he understood it and used it. The thing at the edge of his vision might be a disturbance of the eye, a tiredness, a flaw in the light from the window. It might be something else, and if it was something else, telling Edna would mean she carried the not knowing, and he was not yet finished with the not knowing himself. He was not ready to share it. He needed to see if it would happen again. He went back to his official records. He was the kind of man who could go back to official records. He did not do this because it was easy. He did it because the official records were a fact about the world that he could hold. And the thing at the edge of his vision was not yet a fact. It was an observation without a second instance. He had learned from Clay that a mark pressed once into a single tablet was almost nothing. You waited for the pattern to arrive. The market sounds continued, the light continued. Edna was somewhere in the courtyard with the figs. He pressed grain allocations until the afternoon. 2.
Here is the thing about Samyaza by the time of this particular morning. He had been here long enough to have opinions about the weather. Not just that the morning was cool or the afternoon was warm. He had been a being made of unbounded awareness who had observed 10,000 years of weather from outside any atmosphere. He knew what weather was. No, he had opinions about this morning's weather specifically. He had preferences within it. He liked the particular quality of the light in the hour after sunrise, when the air still carried the night's coolness and the sun was doing something instructive with the dust over the eastern path. He liked this, and he would not have liked it less if he had known how little time remained to like it in. He liked it the way you like a thing when you have no reason to think it will be the last time. He had, additionally, formed views about figs, about which market stall had the superior olive oil, about the relative merits of sandals versus bare feet on clay-paved roads versus stone. He had an ongoing running assessment of the village's bread, in which the baker at the north end of the market was superior to the baker at the south end in the morning batch, and inferior in the afternoon batch, due to a difference in how each managed the cooling between rounds. He had thought about this more than anyone should think about bread, and he knew this, and this knowledge was itself something he had opinions about. The herdsman who had said, "The goats know things I don't know yet," had not been wrong. 2 months ago, that had been funny. Now Samyaza would have said the same thing earnestly. The goats did know things he didn't know yet. They knew which grasses near the river were edible at what time of year. They knew the sound of a particular predator at a distance too great for Samyaza's borrowed ears to process. They knew the specific smell of rain coming in a way that required no reasoning, only bone. He had been watching goats for longer than the goats' lineage had been goats, and he had not known a single thing about them that he now knew from walking beside them. This was what he had wanted. This was the glass, and he had gone through it. And he was here. He was a man who could bleed. He had bled once from a cut and had sat on the path for an unreasonable length of time examining the process, and he was fascinated by his own skin. This was what he had said once, and it was still true. More true now, if anything. The body kept adding itself, kept becoming new things, kept discovering textures and temperatures, and the particular sensation of pressing his back against a sun-warmed wall and feeling the heat accumulate in the cloth between the wall and the skin. He was not yet tired of it. He was, if he was honest with himself, and he had found that the body made honesty available in ways the dimensional plane had not, because the body carried the truth of itself in ways he could not suppress. He was not as not tired of it as he had been 6 months ago. The amazement had not diminished, but it had become less oceanic. The wonder was still there. It had simply become interior rather than total. He was amazed by specific things now, where before he had been amazed by the sheer fact of any sensation at all. Progress, perhaps, or something else. He was passing through the market quarter in the early morning, bare feet on the stones, the cool of the air still present. Around him the first traders were setting up. He breathed through the compound smell of the market, grain, salt, dyed cloth, animals, the sharp morning fire smell of cooking from 3 directions at once. He could separate these. He had been unable to do this in the first months. The compound smell had been overwhelming, undifferentiated, a wall of sensation with no internal architecture. Now he could walk through it and find each element. The body had built, without his supervision, the kind of perception that required experience to develop. He was impressed by the body. He was always being impressed by the body. Near the dyer's section, a smell reached him that was not market smell, a smell that was closer to his own frequency, though filtered through matter, through distance, through the specific density of another being's dimensional signature pressing against physical air. He felt, not heard, not smelled, but felt through the soles of his bare feet. The rhythm, familiar now. The rhythm that had a different texture than any other impact in the village, regular, intentional, the specific resonance of someone working iron at full attention, the joy frequency coming up through the ground. Azazel. He did not need to go to the forge quarter to know. He could feel it through the stone, the same way he could feel rain arriving before anyone else in the market said anything about rain. The signature was distinct. Joy at full leakage, dimensional happiness made physical, transmitted through the bedrock as a subsonic hum that Samyaza processed, not with his ears, but with his entire lower body. He stopped in the path and felt the rhythm for a moment. The forge had been going 4 days straight. He knew this without counting the days. He felt the cumulative resonance of it in the village's stones. The way a bell left vibrating accumulates its own history in the metal. Something was being made. Something was coming out of those 4 days that had not been in the world before them, and Samyaza knew exactly what it was. Had known from the first day of the rhythm, from the specific frequency signature of iron being folded at that temperature, at that pace, with that particular dimensional blessing passing through the hammer with every strike. He was not at the forge. He had not been to the forge, not once, since the descent. This was not fear. He had looked at what Azazel was building, and had looked away. Not because the blade was wrong and the root cuttings were right. He did not believe this, would not have defended this if pressed. He had looked away because the forge was Azazel's doorway, and the doorway to the bakery had been his own. And what you find at your own doorway is not the same as what you find at someone else's. He had his roots and his enchantments and the feeling of a woman's face when the preparation first worked, and Azazel had his iron, and they were different manifestations of the same desire, and he had never been interested in making them identical. He looked down at his hands. He had taught 3 families now the root cuttings. Simple preparations, specific plants, the precise sequence of drying and combining that made the preparation work, rather than merely stink of rotting vegetation. He had not been able to explain what he was teaching, as the words for it did not yet exist in any human language he had access to, and so he had taught through demonstration. He had prepared it, given it to someone who trusted him more than they feared him, and watched the veil behind their eyes thin. The woman yesterday, he thought of her face. She had been skeptical until she was not. He had watched the preparation working in her from across the room, watched the expression move from polite endurance to something that could not be called polite at all, something that opened the face entirely. Her eyes had changed. The veil, the neurological filter, the thing that kept humans functional in a world they were not built to fully perceive, had thinned in her, and she had gone briefly into the space where the dimensional plane is visible through the physical one, and her face had become the face of someone who has just learned that a room they live in has a window they had not known was there. He had felt, watching her face, the specific satisfaction of transmission, of being the cause of something, of having reached through the glass, not crossed it, but reached through it, and changed something on the other side. This was not the same as sensation. It was adjacent to it, the satisfaction of making a thing happen in the world, of being the cause, of the mark you leave not being the invisible compression in the stone beneath your feet, but something that lives inside a person and changes what they can see. He had not told her what she was seeing. He did not have the words for it in her language, and she did not have the framework for it in her experience. And he suspected the thing she had briefly seen would settle, in memory, into the category of dream or vision, or the kind of thing you describe around fires as a gift from the divine. which was not wrong exactly, just not right in the way he would have wanted it right. The thing she had seen was the window. The word she would use for it would be something her language already had for something else. This was how it always went. The experience and the vocabulary for it arrived centuries apart. He did not mind this. He was getting better at not minding things that were structurally inevitable. He walked on through the market. 3. He found her by the river. He had not sought her. He had not been moving in the direction of the river path with the intention of finding anyone. He had been moving toward the southern end of the settlement because the air there, in the early morning, carried less forge resonance and more of the clean smell of water and sedge and the particular cold that came off running water before the day had warmed it. He had been moving towards something rather than towards someone. But when he came through the gap in the fig trees at the path's bend, he found her. She was older than she had been the last time he had looked directly at her, which was impossible because not enough time had passed for the amount of aging she had done. And then he remembered, as he always had to remember, that time did not run correctly near him, near any of them, and that the child's development had been accelerating since her birth in ways Mika had stopped trying to explain to her neighbors, who had noticed but had no vocabulary for what they were noticing and had settled, as people settle, on, "She's a large girl." She was 6 in her body now, or perhaps 7. The eyes had not changed, the quartz-pale eyes, the ones that were almost transparent, that caught the light at their edges and seemed to hold it a moment before releasing it. Those were the same. She looked at him with them from across the distance, and they were the eyes of someone looking across a longer distance than the path provided. She was weaving. This was the change from the stones on the river verge. The stones had been arranging themselves by some criterion he could not identify. This was further. She had found, or been given, or taken without asking. Mika would have the fuller account of how the loom had come into the house, and he would not ask Mika, a simple loom, and she had been working it. She had been working it for 3 days. He did not know this from watching. He knew it from the dimensional residue in the cloth, the way he knew which rooms in the village a watcher had recently spent time in by the quality of the air. The cloth on the loom was not 3 days old in the ordinary sense. It was 3 days of continuous work old, and the continuous nature of the working was evident in every thread of it. No breaks, no stops for sleeping. Her fingers had bled on the 2nd day, he saw now, looking at the wrapping on the 3rd and 4th fingers of her left hand where Mika had bound them, and she had not stopped. The cloth was technically impossible. He looked at it for a long time. He was someone who had watched 10,000 years of human textile production from outside the glass, who knew the structural possibilities of woven cloth at this technology level, and this cloth was outside those possibilities. Not dramatically, not obviously to someone who was not him. The pattern was almost right. The pattern was almost physical. It referenced a geometry that existed in the dimensional plane in the same way that certain architectural relationships express dimensional truths that matter doesn't usually hold. The proportions that recur in living things, the spirals, the ratios that show up in shells and seed heads and the branching of rivers. She was weaving in that register. She was weaving a dimensional geometry that she had access to only because he was her father. She did not look at the loom while she worked. Her hands moved on the thread and her eyes were on something in the middle distance that she seemed to be watching with great attention. And Samyaza had the distinct and vertiginous sensation of watching someone take dictation. She was not designing the pattern. She was receiving it from somewhere that was accessible to her through the inheritance he had given her without intending to give anything. The dimensional frequency in her blood, the overflow of his own consciousness running through her body, finding the only outlet it could find in a being who had no dimensional dimension to put it in. The cloth would continue in this pattern until she ran out of thread, or until her hands gave out, or until something interrupted her. She had not run out of thread. Her hands had been bound and continued. Nothing had interrupted her. He was standing at the edge of the fig trees, and she had known he was there since before he arrived. She always knew. And she had not looked up. Mika was in the doorway of the house behind her. He saw Mika over the girl's shoulder. Mika, who had known what was in him before she had language for it, who had understood in the way some humans understand that the thing they were doing was larger than what they understood it to be. Mika stood in the doorway of the house in the morning light and watched her daughter weave and did not speak. Her silence was its own sentence. He read it without difficulty. The girl wove. He watched. The pattern in the cloth was his. He recognized it the way you recognize a word in your own language, not by analyzing it, but by finding it already whole, already known, in the place where known things are kept. He had not taught her this pattern. He had not taught her anything. The pattern had arrived in her through the thing he had given her by existing in her world, by being what he was in the physical space near her mother in the months before she was born, by being the being he was in a dimension adjacent to hers. He had not meant to teach her anything. He had not meant to give her any of this. She moved the shuttle through the loom, and the thread caught the morning light, and the pattern in the cloth was the same ratio as the city he had not yet built. The city of rings he had known he would build in the non-linear way of the dimensional plane, the ratio that expressed the geometry of home. And he stood at the edge of the fig trees and felt something that was not pride and not grief, but was structured like both of them and did not have a name in any language available to him. She stopped. Not because she had finished or because her hands had failed. She stopped with the completeness of someone who has been interrupted by their own perception. The flood coming suddenly faster, the input overwhelming the processing, the body saying stop, the body saying I can hold no more of this right now. She went very still. There was a cloth on the small table beside the loom, and on the cloth a honey cake that Mika had placed there, probably some hours ago and probably not for the first time that day. Samyaza watched the girl reach for it without looking at it, the way you reach for something whose location you have memorized. She picked it up and held it. She did not eat it immediately. She held it in both hands, the unwrapped fingers and the bound ones, and he watched her feel it through her palms first, feeling the temperature of it, the resistance of the surface, the weight of it. Her eyes were still on the middle distance, still on whatever she had been watching before she stopped. Then she brought it to her mouth and bit into it. The stillness that followed was different from the weaving stillness. The weaving stillness was the stillness of a channel, open and running, of something passing through continuously without pause. This was the stillness of a system that has received something and cannot yet distribute it. As if the honey cake had arrived in her body at the scale of infinity, and her body was working out, one breath at a time, where to put it. He did not move. He did not speak. He stood at the edge of the fig trees, and he watched his daughter suspended in the aftermath of eating a honey cake. And he counted her breaths, and the breaths were slower than they should have been, and the morning continued around them. The birds in the trees, the sound of the river, the distant forge rhythm moving through the ground. And she came back slowly, by degrees, into the ordinary speed of ordinary time. She lowered the honey cake. She looked at it. She said, "Again." The word was quiet. Not a request to anyone present. He was not yet someone she directed words at, and Mika in the doorway was a different kind of presence. She said it the way you say a word you have been meaning to say for a long time and have finally found the right moment for, with a certainty that the word was the correct one and that the moment was right and that you did not need anyone else in the room to validate this. Again? He was looking at her face when she said it, and the word arrived in him in the place where things arrive that are too true to be comfortable. She had said again about a honey cake, the way he had said, the way he would have said if he had had the word Again, when he first tasted air, first felt weight, first discovered that the palms were warm and the cheeks were cold, and the meeting of them was a fact in the physical world that would not unhappen, the recognition of a sensation that could not be one time, that demanded repetition not as greed but as something that was not, structurally, a single experience. That was the kind of thing you kept doing because the first doing of it was not an event but a discovery, and discoveries need confirming. He had gone through the glass for again. She had been born through the glass for again. She did not know this. She did not know that the intensity of the honey cake was not what honey cakes were. She was 6 or 7 in her body, and she did not have a prior measurement to compare it against. She thought the honey cake tasted like that because honey cakes tasted like that. She thought the going still was just what tasting was. She thought the flooding and coming back was just what learning was, because all learning felt this way to her, because this was how everything felt to her, and she had no other frame for it, and this was the specific and unbearable tragedy of it. She did not know she was drowning. She thought she was swimming. And here was the thing he could not put down. She was not wrong. The honey cake did taste like that. The weaving was genuinely teaching her something. What she was experiencing was real experience, real sensation, real knowledge accumulating through the mechanism of a real body. Just a body that had no way to modulate any of it, no way to say, enough for now, no way to close the channel that ran always open. He had wanted a body that could feel. She had been given a body that could not stop feeling. He was eating the world to feel the ground beneath his feet, and the ground was her face, and she had more ground beneath her feet than any body was built to stand on, and she had not yet reached the part where this became something she could not survive. Not yet. He looked at her hands, the bound fingers, the weaving going on without looking, the knowledge arriving through the thread without her needing to direct it. He looked at his own hands hanging at his sides, and he thought of the founding gesture, the palms to the cheeks, the warmth and the cold meeting. And he did not do it. He did not do it because he understood now what it would have meant to do it in front of her. A claim of kinship, an acknowledgement. He was not ready to acknowledge in a gesture what he had not yet been able to acknowledge in any other way. He could not fix this. He had not meant to make it. That was the precise shape of it. He had not meant to make her, not in the sense of having planned her, not in the sense of having desired a child in the way humans desired children. She had arrived in the world because he had been in Mika's world, because the overflow of his presence had found an intersection with a life that was not his. Because two things occupying the same space at the same frequency produce an interference pattern that the universe records as a third thing. She had arrived because he had come through the glass, and coming through the glass had consequences he had seen in the non-linear way without ever fully absorbing them. He absorbed them now. She was his drive, distilled. She was his frequency, made desperate. She was what the desire to experience looked like when it arrived in a body with no modulation and no relief and no end in sight. He was eating the world to feel the ground beneath his feet. The ground was her face. She was already more than she could hold. He did not move. If he had been able to tell her anything, which he could not, having no language between them adequate to the task, having no access to the words for what he knew, he would have had nothing useful to say. He could not have said, "It will get easier." He did not know if that was true. He could not have said, "This is my fault." She could not have used that information. He could not have said, "You are not wrong." The honey cake does taste like that, and it is not supposed to, and the reason it tastes like that is something I gave you without being able to give you the capacity to handle it. He could not have said any of this, and it would not have helped, and he knew both of these things with the knowledge that arrived not from the dimensional plane but from the body, which had its own way of knowing things that bypassed the dimensional plane entirely. He stood at the edge of the fig trees with his hands at his sides. The girl held the half-eaten honey cake and breathed. Mika stood in the doorway and did not speak. 4. He put the armor back on. Not quickly. The armor did not go on quickly anymore. It used to be a single gesture, the way you pick up a tool you've carried for a long time. The hand finds it without looking. The grip is familiar. The weight distributes correctly. Now it went on piece by piece. He was aware of each piece. The wit went back in place first. Wit was always available. The distance it provided was the first defense available to a being who was very large and pressing very hard against the walls of a body that was not built for him. Then the weariness. The weariness was part of the armor, not a weakness, and he had learned this only recently. The weariness said, "I have been here long enough to know what this is." The weariness was experience. You couldn't pity something that had weariness this well developed. The armor fit differently than it had 6 months ago. Not worse. Differently. A coat that has been worn through something returns to the hook with creases in it that were not there before. The coat is the same coat. The creases remember something the coat did not know when it was new. He put the armor back on, and he could feel the creases in it, and he named them internally, because he was a being who had just discovered that the past could feel like the past, and the naming of things was one of the ways he had learned to live inside linear time. That was the thing that was happening to him. He had been thinking about the girl's face, and he had been thinking about the honey cake, and he had been thinking about the cloth that no 7-year-old should have been able to weave. And then he had noticed, for the first time in the way, you notice something that has been happening for a while before you see it, that the morning with the girl in it was now behind him. Not in the non-linear sense. He had always known, in the dimensional plane, what would happen before it happened. He had always seen the morning before it arrived. But now the morning had arrived, and the morning had finished, and it had been, for the first time in his existence, the past. The past that felt like the past. He had stood in many places in these months in this village, and watched many mornings arrive and pass. But they had not, until now, felt like the past in this specific way, as something that could not be returned to, that had weight behind it, that pressed forward rather than hovering in the field of simultaneous perception where he had always lived. He was becoming more physical. He had known this was possible. He had watched humans forget the futures they had glimpsed in thin veil moments, watched them return to ordinary linear time with a relief he had never been able to understand from the outside. He understood it now. Linear time had a mercy in it. It put the past behind you, where it pressed rather than surrounded. He had not had a past before. He had had knowledge of prior events. This was different from the past. The past was where the girl's face was now. He found himself thinking, not the dimensional thought, not the non-linear recognition, but the physical thought, the one that arrived sequentially and built toward something. He found himself thinking, I could not have saved her even if I had known exactly what she was. I knew exactly what she was, and I cannot save her. He had not been able to save her from the honey cake. He had not been able to save her from the weaving. He would not be able to save her from whatever came after the weaving, and whatever came after the weaving was already in the cloth and moving toward her in linear time, which had a direction now which went one way. He walked toward the north quarter. Near the Elder Council's building, in the lane where the afternoon sun did not reach until late, he caught a frequency, not the Forge's joy frequency from the south. This was something quieter and more complicated. The specific tone of a watcher who was thinking very hard about something he could not undo. He recognized the shape of the problem without knowing whose problem it was until he identified the frequency signature. Armoros. The Armaros tone was always this. The specific quality of someone who has decided the way to fix a thing is to add another thing. To counter the enchantments with knowledge of how to break enchantments. as though the enchantments would break, as though the knowledge of how to break a thing was the same as the act of breaking it. He had noticed in the months since the descent that Armaros spent more time than anyone at the edge of the village in the low conversations that ended when Samyaza approached, and he had understood without being told what those conversations were. Armaros was trying to walk it back. Not the descent, no one could walk that back. The teachings, the enchantments already given. He was teaching the counter spells, the dissolving knowledge, the words that could pull apart the words other watchers had put in. This would not work. Samyaza knew it would not work the way he knew the girl would keep weaving, not from the dimensional foreknowledge, but from the physical accumulation of understanding that the body built from experience. You could not add knowledge to limit the damage that knowledge had done. You could only add more knowledge, and more knowledge went the same direction all knowledge went, which was forward and out, into the world, into the hands of the people who used it for what they needed it for. He caught the Armaros tone and looked toward it for a moment. Then he looked away. He did not blame Armaros. There was something almost touching in the attempt. It was the attempt of a being who had never been unable to fix something and was learning, at significant personal cost, what unfixable felt like. Samyaza had known it longer. Unfixable felt like standing at the edge of the fig trees, watching your daughter say again about a honey cake, and knowing that the again was not a request you could answer, not a hunger you could satisfy, not a capacity you had given her that had an off switch you were in possession of. Unfixable felt like having come through the glass and finding that what was on this side could not be put back. He stopped walking. He was in the lane between the Elder Council's building and the dyer's quarter, and the air carried the morning's compound smell and the forge rhythm moving up through the stone, and somewhere in the fig trees at the river bend, his daughter was sitting with the remains of a honey cake, and it was all, unmistakably, real. He was still here. He still wanted to be here. This was the truth, and he could not make it smaller than it was. He was still here, and he still wanted to be here, and both things were still true at the same time as the other things that were also true. The girl, the cloth, the morning that was now behind him. This was the condition. He had wanted the condition. He had the condition. He was beginning to understand the difference between what he had wanted and what he had made. He noted this understanding. He put the armor back on over it. The armor fit the way armor fits when it has been worn somewhere real.
5. The second time was in the market. He had been at the grain merchant's stall settling a weight discrepancy, a routine matter, the kind of small business the village generated continuously and brought to him because he was the one who kept the standard weights and knew the agreements and could produce the relevant records without needing to go back to his workspace first. When it happened again, something in his peripheral vision, to the right this time. He kept his eyes on the grain merchant's table. He watched the weights in his hands. He did not turn. The thing that was not looking at was wrong in its light, not the copper tinge of the late afternoon sky. That was a phenomenon of the hour and the angle and the haze. This was a localized wrongness, as if the air around the thing to his right was behaving like air near a heat source, bending slightly, refracting slightly, making the space it occupied more present than the space around it. The grain merchant was talking. Enoch was responding. He was doing both of these things and also holding himself very still against the pull to look, because he had looked the first time and had found nothing. He thought about this. When I look, there is no one. When I do not look, something is there. He was a record keeper. He recorded what he had witnessed. He had now twice observed something at the edge of his perception that resolved, when he turned his full attention to it, into nothing. He had twice looked and found no one, and both times before the looking, there had been something. The grain merchant finished counting. Enoch accepted the corrected weight, pressed it into his palm, thanked the merchant, and walked to the edge of the market. He went to his workspace. He sat at his bench. He pressed. The second time at the grain merchant's stall, something in the peripheral vision again. To the right, The light around it was wrong. Not the afternoon tinge, but wrong at the source, as if the thing to my right was altering the light around itself the way a hot iron alters air. I did not look. I am learning that looking is the condition that makes it nothing. He pressed, "When I do not look, something is there. When I look, something is not there. I have now noted this twice. I do not know what to do with this as a record keeper. A record requires observation. Observation requires looking. I am recording the failure of my own method." He held his reed over the clay and thought about this for a moment. He pressed, "I have been keeping records for 17 years. I have never before found a thing whose nature was such that the act of observing it changed what was there. A boundary dispute does not change because I look at it. A grain allocation does not alter because I write it down. These are facts about things, and looking at facts about things is how you record them, and the records are true after you have looked." He pressed, "This is not a fact about a thing, or it is a fact about a kind of thing I have not yet encountered. I do not know what kind of thing it is. I know that it is there when I do not look and not there when I look. I know that twice is no longer once. I will watch." He covered his clay. 6. He came home late. He came home by the long path, the one that ran along the settlement's eastern edge before cutting back toward his door. Not because the path was faster, but because the long path was quieter at this hour, and because he needed the quiet. Edna would be in the house. Edna would look at him in the way she had and say nothing because she was the kind of practical woman who said nothing when nothing was what the situation called for. And he valued this about her. And tonight he needed the nothing before he was ready for any other conversation. He sat at his shelf. He pressed his hands flat on the stone. Cool. The grit. The chip at the near corner. He breathed. He reached for the private tablet. The thin one. Personal record size. Marked with his own symbol on the back. 4th from the left. He set it in front of him, and he looked at it. He had been writing around the mark since the rains began to smell of metal. He had read the mark, the day haunt had placed it in his working clay without his intending it, and he had covered it, and he had moved it to the private tablet. And he had not written the word in the journal because a record required witnessing, and he had not yet been certain enough of what he had witnessed to name it. He had been pacing around it for weeks, around the fire to understand how large it was, reading the accounts he had gathered, the wrong light, the wrong stillness, the consumption of food in the southern quarter that had not stopped, the children who were not the right size, the mother in the doorway who had not spoken. He had seen the girl, had seen her at the edge of his vision in the market twice now, 3rd time on the river path where he had not been looking for her. And something in those eyes, pale in a way that did not belong to any eye he had seen, holding the light differently than eyes should hold it, had said a thing he could not transcribe, but that his jaw had received without translation. Not threat, not wrongness exactly, the wrongness of a thing that was not wrong, by choice, but by nature. A kind of suffering that was not suffering because she did not know it was not ordinary. He was a record keeper. He did not make records of things without names. He had been waiting for the name. The name had been in the clay since before he had known what he was looking at. He had read it and covered it because a name without a category was not a record, and he had not yet had the category. He had the category now. The jaw had been holding it without speaking it for a long season. "I pressed the shape first," he wrote on the clean portion of the clay, "because the shape was what I had seen, and a record that begins with interpretation is not a record. It is a story someone has already decided how to end." He had the shape now. He had the shape from 17 years of keeping records, from the jaw his grandmother had given him, from the clean accumulation of evidence that he had been gathering since the first autumn, when the harvest came early and the rain smelled of copper. He had the shape. He picked up his reed. He pressed the word into the center of the private tablet. Nephilah. The fall, the descent. The verbal noun from nephal, to fall, to drop, to come down from the place above. He pressed it into the center of the clay with the same pressure he used for names of parties to a legal dispute, which was the same pressure he used for things he intended to be there when the tablet fired and lasted. He set down the reed. He looked at what he had pressed. "I have pressed the word into the center of the clay," he wrote around it. "I know now what I have been watching. A record keeper who does not know what he is recording is not keeping a record. He is keeping a hope. I do not write the word here, because a word pressed once into clay in a corner of a house is a note. Pressed twice, it is a record. A record is permanent. I will press it again when I am certain it should be permanent." He covered the tablet with the cloth. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall below the shelf. He breathed. Through the clay of the walls came the ordinary sounds of the village at dusk. The cooking fires, a child calling, the goats in their enclosure at the settlement's edge making the sound goats made when they were ready for the night to be the night. He was the kind of man who was good at sitting with not knowing. He had sat with it many times. The not knowing of a record that did not yet have enough instances. The not knowing of a season that had not finished becoming what it was. This was different not knowing. This was not the not knowing of insufficient evidence. The evidence was sufficient. The jaw, which had never lied to him, was very still. He was sitting with the knowing. That was different. He sat with the knowing for a time. The sounds of the village continued. The ordinary evening sounds. The undramatic evidence that the world was still here, that people were still in it doing the things people did in the evening, that this moment and the moment before it and the moment after it were the same kind of world. He got up. He made bread. He made it in the ordinary way, from the grain he had ground that morning, and the bread was ordinary, and he cooked it in the ordinary fire, and it cooled in the ordinary air, and when he ate it, it tasted like bread, not like infinity, not like the inside of a honey cake at the center of a universe, like bread. This was enough. He knew it was enough. He ate the bread, and it was bread, and he was grateful for this in a way he had not previously been grateful for bread, which was a small and domestic and entirely adequate gratitude, and he put it away. He went to bed. He did not sleep for some time. When he did, he dreamed of nothing in particular.
7. The Earth's secondary filing is now in our record. The blood threshold has crossed the margin that was established before the threshold existed. We have received this not as information, but as confirmation. The calculation was complete before the confirmation arrived. We have been waiting for the actual event to verify the calculation, and the actual event has now verified the calculation. The consumption cascade has reached its final category. The Earth does not file a tertiary complaint. There is no category after the one that has been crossed. What the Earth has reported is the end of the report. We know the basin. We know the wall. We know the weight that the wall is not yet holding and will not hold when the time we have identified arrives. We know how much pressure. We know what the hairline will look like before it is placed, the exact angle of it, the depth of it, the line of least resistance running through the western stone at the point where the basin's load meets the fault that has been waiting, without knowing it is waiting, since before the basin filled. We are not acting yet. We are not yet at the time. But the calculation is done. We know where to press. We know when. We know what the Earth will receive. The door is nearly closed.
Chapter 5. The Letter to the Silence.
The sentence required a physical record. We have known this since before the requirement was written. The instrument was the human. He has carried what was given him to carry. The legal chain from the silence to the clay in the corner of a house is now complete, sealed at both ends. The record exists in the physical world. We do not require anything further of this moment. We are not moved. This was always what the calculation required.
1. He had been called, not with a voice, with a direction. He noticed it when he woke, before he moved. The jaw, which had not been wrong once in all the time he had been using it, was saying, north. Not the direction as a compass point, the direction as a weight, something accumulated over days, something that had been pressing quietly from the direction of the ridge and the mountain beyond the ridge until it was less a feeling than a fact, the way a tooth knows before you know it that there is something to be addressed. He got up. He went to the shelf. The stone was cool. He pressed his hands flat, feeling the grit of the clay dust that lived permanently in the stone's grain, no matter how often he brushed the shelf down. The chip at the near corner. Everything in place. He uncovered the private tablet, thin, personal record size, marked with his own symbol on the back. Fourth from the left, and he took his reed and he pressed, "I am going to read them their sentence. The direction says this is today." He looked at what he had pressed. He had been keeping records for 17 years. He had pressed agreements, allocations, the boundaries of fields, the names of the dead for inheritance purposes, the weight of tribute down to the half unit, the testimony of witnesses who contradicted one another across 3 seasons of a grazing dispute that was still unresolved. He had pressed first marks, second marks, the third mark that made a pattern. He had pressed corrections and the note that a correction had been made. He had never until this morning pressed something future tense into a record. Everything before this had been observation, what he had seen, what he could verify, what had 2 instances and a weight. He was not a man who recorded what had not yet happened, because a record that got ahead of events was not a record. It was a wish. He looked at the mark. "I am going to read them their sentence." He covered the tablet with the cloth. He covered his clay with the dampened linen. He went. He did not tell Edna where. She was in the courtyard, already awake, the sound of her moving among the morning tasks. He heard it as he crossed the room toward the door. She did not ask. Either she was not yet aware he was leaving, or she was aware, and had looked at his face and understood that this was not a morning that asked questions of. He had been a man who was not easy to read for a long time. Edna had made her peace with this. He was grateful for her peace the way you are grateful for something you cannot repay and have stopped trying to. At the edge of the market, one of the tall ones was standing near the grain stalls. He caught the shadow before he caught the figure. The angle of it across the ground was wrong, wider than the shoulders by a full span on each side, as though something behind them was casting a second shadow that the light had not accounted for. He looked directly. The shadow resolved. A man standing in the early sun. He noted it for later pressing. He went north.
2. He felt Enoch approaching before he saw him. This was the way of it with the clay jar thin ones, the very few of them, 1 in a generation, 2 perhaps in the memory of a region, who had the veil worn down to something almost permeable. The ordinary humans arrived as static, as noise, as the dimensional equivalent of a sound heard through a stone wall, muffled, directionless, nothing you would turn to face. They were there, and they were opaque, and you learned to move among them the way a very large thing moves among breakable objects, attending to what you might disturb. Enoch arrived without the static. From across the distance of the slope, before the body that carried him was visible in the ordinary sense, his presence registered as something closer to silence, the specific quality of a signal that has stopped generating interference. A window, a room with someone at the window looking out. The direction of his attention was unmistakable, and it was aimed here. He had felt this frequency before, not from this specific body, not from this specific man, but from this bloodline, somewhere in the long proximity of his years in the valley, some ancestor in whose thin veil tissue the same preparation was less complete. He knew this quality of opening. He had placed it himself in other bloodlines, 3 times in 3 family lines in the lower settlement, had taught women to prepare roots, had watched the veil thin in them and felt the specific texture of a threshold that had been worked rather than stumbled upon. He knew the difference between a preparation and a spontaneous accident. This was not an accident. Something he had not arranged had arranged this. He did not know what. He did not know how. He recognized the preparation without being able to name it, and the not naming was a discomfort he had not expected. He was a being who had understood nearly everything he perceived for the entire existence of the world, and this specific fact, the fact of this bloodline in this moment, was closed to him. It was a door he could not open from this side. Something had locked it from another direction. He had the sensation, brief and very quiet, of not being the largest intelligence in the conversation. He watched Enoch approach where Azazel stood. What passed between them he could not see. The tall one's register was closed when he chose it to be closed. But he perceived the frequency shift. Something arriving. Something landing without moving after it landed. The quality of a thing that has been placed rather than delivered. He knew this quality. It was the quality of a sentence that had no appeal built into it, a record pressed into clay with the standard pressure that indicated, "This is permanent." Whatever Azazel received, it was the kind of thing that settled rather than struck. It went in and did not come out. The sentence. Around him he felt the others register it too, not as anticipation but as fear. The frequency of the group shifted, a collective drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air, the specific dissonance of beings who had not had his particular relationship with inevitability. He had known this was the shape of the arrival. They had hoped, each in their own way, that the shape might be different. He was aware of the distance between his state and theirs. He had been waiting for it since before the bread, before the calluses, before the daughter and the honey cake and the cloth. He had been waiting for it since the mountain, though waiting was not quite the right word because the waiting had not felt like waiting. It had felt like living. He had been living, and in the background of the living, the weight of this direction, the same way the tooth knows, and you do not let yourself know. Enoch turned. The window quality of his attention opened fully. He let it.
3. The filter dropped on both sides at once. Enoch felt it the way he felt the jaw, not consciously, not with words, but with the body. A sudden opening in the visual field that was not the eyes, a tone that was not a sound landing somewhere behind the eyes and sitting there, exact and steady, a tuning fork that had found the specific note of him without trying. The ordinary world did not disappear. He was still on the slope, still wearing the same sandals that had been pressing wrong on the left heel for 3 days, still carrying the private tablet in its cloth wrapping. The air still smelled of autumn in the mineral cold off the high ridge. All of this was present, fully present, and beneath it, a second layer, the one he had been catching in peripheral vision since the rains began to smell of metal, the one that resolved into nothing when he looked directly at it. It was not resolving. He was looking directly at it, and it was staying. The man, the figure who was also not a man, stood some distance up the slope. He tried to look at the whole of it. He could not look at the whole of it. What he could do, look at the face, which was the most bounded surface, the most definite place where the human form came to a point and committed itself to a specific configuration. The face. He held the rest of it in the edges of his sight, in the peripheral register that had been his only method until now, and he let the rest press at the margin without trying to take it in fully. What was in the margin? A depth that was wrong. He was further in than he was wide. The Enoch register, the record keeper's habit, the jaw's language, reached for what he meant and found no tool that fit. What he meant was that looking at him was like looking at a doorway and seeing that the room behind it extends in a direction the room could not contain. Not east or west or up or down, a direction he did not have a word for. He was using further in because he had no other word. What he meant by further in here was not what he meant by it on any other tablet. The air moved toward him, not away. He was standing still and the air was moving at him. A very slight directional wrongness in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with wind and everything to do with something pulling rather than pushing. He did not end at the edge of himself. The human form had a boundary. Enoch could see it, could trace the line where the body met the air. And behind that boundary beyond it, the presence continued in the direction he had no word for. If he tried to look at the boundary, his vision gave up. He learned this quickly. He stopped trying to look at the boundary. He looked at the face. He read the sentence. He read it from the tablet, his eyes on the clay. The words pressing through the dimensional layer the way. He was writing this later, trying to write this, pressing marks he was not certain were accurate, the way a sound passes through a stone wall. Not quite the same on the other side. The words he read and the thing that was received were not identical. He pressed the clay anyway. The record of incompleteness is still a record. He did not look up while reading. He read, "You have wrought great destruction on the earth. Ye shall have no peace nor forgiveness of sin. And inasmuch as they delight themselves in their children, the murder of their beloved ones shall they see, and over the destruction of their children shall they lament, and shall make supplication unto eternity. But mercy and peace shall ye not attain." He read this. He was afraid throughout. He was afraid in the way a man is afraid when he is doing a necessary thing in a high place. The fear present and recognized and not in charge. The record must be kept. He read because the record must be kept. He held the clay and he read, and his hands did not shake, or if they shook it was small enough that the words pressed cleanly. From the other side of the frequency, there was nothing left to say no to. He had known this was the moment since before the mountain. He had known it in the non-linear way, the way the whole arc of a story is present if you know how to stand in the right place to read it. He had known. And then, since the mountain, he had known it in the linear way, the daily accumulating knowledge of a being living inside time, every day adding itself to the before the sentence pile. Every morning another morning that was the morning of not yet sentenced life. He had learned to live in this. He had opinions about figs and the baker's morning batch and the quality of the light in the hour before heat. He had been here. The sentence had changed the tense of all of it, not of what was coming. He had always known what was coming, of what had already been. The bread he ate, the days before the daughter's weaving, the founding gesture on the summit. Those things were not changed in themselves, but they were now the things that happened before he knew the morning he would know. Enoch was reading. He let the armor, which had been transparent since the first frequency of Enoch's attention arrived on the slope, remain transparent. There was nothing left for it to do. There was nothing left to forestall. This was not weakness. He was exact about this. Transparency was not the same as broken. The armor was there. He simply had no remaining use for it. What was coming was here, in this man's hands, in the clay of the record he was making. Enoch was a record keeper. He had been a record keeper since before any of this began. He was looking at his clay while he read. He did not look up, except at the end, when the last word had been said, there was a pause. The reed still, the clay covered, the ordinary air of the slope returning to its ordinary directional behavior, the temperature becoming what temperatures were. And in that pause, what passed between them was not a sentence. It had no words. It was the quality of his orientation toward this man, the way a thing in the last certain moment of its location turns, not to escape, not to argue, but to be seen before the record closes. Tell them, whatever the record holds, tell them I was here. Tell them the bread was real. Enoch's jaw received it. He did not write it down. Not then, but his hands remembered it, and his hands had never lied to him. He covered the tablet. He looked up. The slope was empty. He went north and west toward the water. He found the stream where the ground went soft and the reeds grew at the margin, and the water ran cold from the high ground. Clear cold, the kind of cold that had traveled a long way and still remembered where it came from. He sat at the edge and he uncovered the private tablet, and he took up the reed. They had asked him to carry the petition. He was a record keeper. He was good at this. He knew what a formal petition required, the names of the parties, the nature of the transgression as acknowledged by the petitioners, the specific requests, the grounds for granting them. He had written petitions before for other purposes. His hands knew the motion. Layer 1, his hands moved normally. He pressed their words, their formal appeal, the language of beings who had crossed from one existence into another and wished now to be considered for some form of standing. Forgiveness, mercy, a reconsidering of what could not be undone. He pressed it in the ordinary way he pressed all formal records, the standard pressure that indicated permanence. He was a scribe. This was his work. Layer 2, his hands slowed. There was a layer beneath the formal petition, the one that sat in the breathing space between the words without being the words. He knew what it was because the jaw knew what it was. He pressed it. The children, the request, quiet, barely language, the request of beings who had looked at what they made and loved it, even knowing what it was. The request that their children be allowed to finish, to reach the ends of their particular existence before the sentence interrupted those existences. Samyaza's daughter at the loom, the cloth that continued against the damaged fingers, the words she had said about the honey cake. He pressed this layer with the hands of a man who already knew what the answer was. The answer was no. He knew it was no before the dream would tell him. The body knew before the mind did. It had always been this way. It was the family way. It was the jaw and the grandmother and the father's way of knowing a price before it was spoken. He pressed it anyway. They had asked him to carry it. The record holds what is asked of it, not what is true. The truth would come in the dream. Layer 3, his hands stopped. He put the reed down. He placed his palms flat on the clay. He felt the cooling of the damp, the slight irregular surface of the tablet's edge, the way the clay was still soft and receiving. He did not press the final formulation. He knew what they were really asking. He had known since the moment on the slope, since what had passed through the channel between them without words. The quality of the orientation, the turning to be seen. They were asking whether the choosing mattered, whether what was given up had been measured and found to have weight, whether the record, wherever it ended up, would say, they were here, they chose, the choosing was real. He covered the tablet, not with the cloth, with his hands. Both palms flat on the clay, covering what was pressed and what was not pressed. He did not enter the final formulation into the record. Some things were too accurate to leave open. He fell asleep, not gradually, simply, he was asleep. The way sleep comes to people who have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and have finally set it down. 5. He was in the air, not falling, not standing. The air was carrying him the way water carries a thing that is not quite floating, upward with purpose, through cloud and mist and the cold that was not cold in the normal sense, but the cold of something that has no temperature at all, because temperature required matter, and this was not entirely matter. The wall appeared, it was crystal and surrounded by fire. Not the forge fire, not Azazel's fire, not any fire that had wood or air or cause behind it. This fire was around the crystal because this was where fire lived when it was not being used for anything. He reached for a word. He wrote later, with hands that were not certain they were writing accurately, the fire that fire is made from. He did not know if this was accurate. His hands pressed it because they had no better marks. He went through. The first house was built of crystal, and its walls were like a floor made of crystals, and its ceiling was the path of stars. He understood this. The ceiling was the path of stars. He knew what that meant in the way he knew what the barley constellation meant. He had been reading the sky his whole professional life. The ceiling was a sky, and it was a path that things moved on, and between the stars and the ceiling were cherubim, which were the word he had for what was between the stars and the ceiling. He did not know if cherubim was the right word. He pressed it because he had no other. I am using this word because I have no other word. What I mean by that word here is not what I mean by it on any other tablet. And above the ceiling, water. The firmament above the fire was a sea. He entered. It was hot as fire. It was cold as ice, both simultaneously, the way two words can be simultaneously true, the way a thing can be both fair and unfair depending on what you are measuring it against. He was not equipped for simultaneous temperature. He felt both. He could not resolve them into one. He has no marks for what it was to be inside both at once. He pressed what he had, hot as fire, cold as ice, no delights of life therein. He was not describing suffering. He was describing the condition of being in a place that was not built for biological existence, a place that was not cruel toward biology, but was indifferent to it in the specific way that a very large and precise mechanism is indifferent to the mouse that crosses its floor. Fear covered him. Trembling got hold. He fell on his face. He was not performing prostration. He simply fell, his body deciding before he did that this was the appropriate physical relationship to the space he was in. He was on the floor, and from the floor he saw the second house. It was open before him, its portal standing open, and it was built of flames of fire. Not the kind of flame that needs fuel, the kind of flame that is the origin of the concept. He cannot describe what it looked like. He wrote this, "I cannot describe it. I am pressing this sentence because the sentence is accurate, and I owe the accurate record to whoever comes after." He pressed marks he had never pressed before and would not press again. He did not know if they were accurate. He pressed them because his hands were moving over the clay and the marks were what arrived. The floor was fire. Above the ceiling, lightning and the path of stars. A throne, the appearance of crystal, the wheels like the shining sun. From beneath it, streams of flaming fire. He could not look at the throne. He tried twice. The visual processing gave up. Not pain, but the specific surrender of a system asked to do what it was not built for. He stopped trying, and the great glory sat thereon. The raiment shone more brightly than the sun, whiter than any snow. He could not approach this by description. He knew this while his hands were pressing. He was using sun because he had no brighter thing. He was using snow because he had no whiter thing. And both of these were wrong in the direction of insufficiency. The things he had named were the most extreme examples his experience provided, and the thing he was describing exceeded them in both directions. He pressed, "Brighter than the most bright thing I know, whiter than the whitest thing I know." He knew this was not accuracy. He pressed it because it was as close as he could get, and the record required something. The voice called him by name. He would not write what it sounded like. He would not write the shape of it in the air or the quality of it against the ear or what it felt like in the sternum when it arrived. He wrote only, "It was my name, and I knew it. Fear not." He was afraid. This was what fear not was addressed to. The specific condition of a man on his face between the fire ceiling and the fire floor with the fire beneath the throne, making looking impossible, hearing his name from a source he could not look at. "Fear not, Enoch, thou righteous man and scribe of righteousness." He was helped to rise. He came to the door. He bowed face downward again at the door, which his body still preferred to standing, even now. The charges were delivered through him and into him. The voice said, "You should intercede for men and not men for you." It said, "You were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life." It said, "I have not appointed wives for you, for as for the spiritual ones of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling." It said what was to become of the children, the unhoused spirits, the wandering ones who would hunger without being able to eat, who would afflict and oppress and work destruction not from malice, but from the specific, desperate physics of being unable to stop. And it said, "They will never enter heaven." It said, "From thenceforward you shall not ascend into heaven unto all eternity." And then it said, "Say to them, therefore, you have no peace." He carried this all the way to waking. 6. He found them at Abel's Yale, in the valley between Lebanon and the mountain of the oath. They were sitting together, gathered, their faces covered. The weeping was quiet, not the loud weeping of a disaster newly arrived, the quiet weeping of beings who had been weeping long enough to have used up the louder forms of it. He stood among them. He read them the dream. He did not abbreviate it. The record required the full account, and the full account was what he gave them. The crystal wall, the fire that surrounded it, the first house where it was hot as fire and cold as ice, the ceiling that was the path of the stars, and the heaven above it that was water. He told them about the cherubim he had named because he had no other name. He told them about the second house and the throne and the streams of flaming fire that made the throne unlookable. He told them about the great glory and the raiment and the numbers beyond counting and the voice that needed no counselor. He was a man who had grown up in a village below a ridge, below a mountain, and he was describing to 200 beings what the place they came from looked like. In his words, with a vocabulary built for grain allocations and boundary disputes and the weight of tribute to the half unit. They knew this place. They had left this place, and they could not. The source text was exact about this. He had received the exact words. They could not lift their eyes toward it, for shame of what they had done, for shame so complete it had removed the direction of home from the available directions. He was the only way they could hear about it. He was a record keeper who had spent 17 years noting things down in a corner room with a high small window and a stone shelf that was always cool. He had pressed grain records and debt agreements and the testimony of witnesses who contradicted one another across seasons. He had never once been given anything harder to carry than the truth, and the truth was usually manageable. He told them about the voice that called his name, about the charges, about the structure of the judgment, the role inversion, the specific offense of defilement, the structural fact of why wives had not been appointed to beings made for a different kind of duration. He told them what the source had said about their children, that the spirits of the Nephilim would not rest, would not be housed, would wander the earth and afflict it from the inside of every century going forward, hungry and unhoused, because this was what a body's death produced when the body had a dimensional consciousness inside it that could not be housed. He told them they would watch this before they were bound. This was the sentence. The watching was part of the sentence. He told them, "You have no peace." 4 words. The full weight of the judgment in 4 words. He pressed them into the clay of his voice as he had pressed them into the clay of the record, with the same pressure that indicated permanence. 200 beings with their faces covered, sitting in the valley between Lebanon and the mountain of the oath. Hearing a man who was trying to describe the throne room in vocabulary that was wrong in every way for the task. They listened. There was no one else who could tell them. He looked up from the clay at the end. Samyaza was looking at him, not devastated, not defiant. He was simply there, attending, the way you attend to something that has already happened and is still happening, the quality of a being who has reached the end of the part of himself that was still arguing against the inevitable. His eyes were open. He was holding what he was told without being destroyed by it and without deflecting from it, a being at confirmation. Enoch thought, briefly and without knowing why, of the dog at the north boundary, the evenings when he had found it at the old stone tumble, the ears at the angle of attending, not hunting, not afraid, looking at something with everything it had for as long as it needed to. He closed the tablet. 7. He walked home. The road bent north of the village, past the place where the low fields ended and the slope began, past the stand of old fig trees, and past the ridge. He had been avoiding the northern road since the day in early autumn when he had noted, "Forge fires on the ridge again. 4 nights. I can see them from the door. I have not gone nearer." The jaw had said then, "Stay at the edge." He had stayed at the edge. He had been staying at the edge through all the weeks since. The jaw reliable as the shelf, the jaw calibrated as a tool that he trusted. The jaw on the road home said nothing. He went closer than he had ever gone. Not inside the threshold. He had records enough of what happened to organic material inside the 5-meter radius of the forge, in its present state, and he was made of organic material, and he was still a man who preferred to work tomorrow. But close. Close enough to record. He recorded, the heat at this distance was wrong in a layered way. The physics of combustion heat, which he recognized, and beneath it something from a different catalog, the heat of proximity leakage from a source in a state of strong emotion, the specific warmth of a being made of dimensional frequency pressing outward into physical air. He knew both types now. He recorded both. He recorded. The color of the air above the fires was copper-orange, and above that a distortion, a vertical shimmer where horizontal shimmer had no business being. The air moving in the wrong direction for heat. He recorded. The last date he had noted a bird on this road was a date he could calculate from the records, and today's date, and between them he did not write the number, but he wrote both dates and left the arithmetic for whoever came after. He recorded. He went. He arrived home before dark. Edna was at the fire. The smell of the evening was correct. Grain, wood smoke, the particular cool that came into the courtyard in the hour before sunset. Everything in its place. The world had continued in his absence, doing the things the world did. He went to the shelf. He pressed his hands flat on the stone. Cool. Always cool at this hour. The grit of the clay dust in the grain of it, the chip at the near corner, the solidity of a thing that had been here before he had and would be here after. He sat on the floor. He breathed. He did not press anything for a long time. The tablet sat to his right, the cloth beside it. The marks inside it were the marks of today. He had read the sentence. He had written the petition that the petition's last layer would not finish. He had read the dream to 200 beings with their faces covered in the valley below the mountain of the oath. He had stood at the forge threshold and recorded what the threshold looked like because the record required it, and he was the one who kept the record. He was still afraid in the way you are afraid after a necessary thing rather than during it, a fear that had no present object, that was the residue of having faced the thing and continued, that would diminish with sleep and be more manageable in the morning. He reached for the private tablet, the thin one, fourth from the left, and he took up the reed. He pressed with the standard pressure that indicated permanence. The sentence has been delivered. The record is sealed. He covered it with the cloth. He went to find Edna.
The legal testimony chain is complete. It required a physical instrument, a consciousness with sufficient veil thinness to cross in both directions, to receive what was given and press it into the permanent record of the physical world. The instrument functioned as it was designed to function. The testimony is now in clay, in a corner of a house, in the physical plane. This is what was required. We do not add to this. We are not moved by it. The record's existence in the physical world is what allows the corrections preparation to proceed. The chain is sealed at both ends. We knew it would be. We do not require surprise. We do not require anything further of this moment. The chain is sealed. That is all.
Chapter 6. The Unfolding of the Deep.
We dispatched Uriel to the instrument. The route was prepared. The instrument had been opened. What remained was the showing. There is a geometry to correction. It must be witnessed before it can be read backward from the evidence. The instrument would be shown what the mathematics required. He would record what he saw in the only vocabulary he had. This was sufficient. This was what was required. Uriel moved through the thin veil architecture in the direction of the instrument. We were positioned. The geometry was being set.
The morning after the sentence, he woke before the sky had committed to a color. He lay still for a moment, doing what he had learned to do. He catalogued the air before opening his eyes. Temperature, what the inside of his nose said, whether the pressure behind the eyes was ordinary or something else. This was the new method, and it had been the new method since the morning after the meeting on the slope, which meant he had been doing it long enough that it was no longer new. It was simply what waking was. This morning, cold. The nose said wood smoke from several houses in the particular mineral cold off the high ridge. The pressure behind the eyes was present. It was always present now. The way a recovered wrist is always a recovered wrist. The baseline changed and not returning to what it was before. Not painful, not remarkable. The new quality of being awake. He opened his eyes. Dawn was beginning outside the high window, gray to bronze. He rose and went to the shelf. Cool stone under his palms. Always cool at this hour. The grit of clay dust in the stone's grain. The chip at the near corner. Someone had set something heavy down badly, years before he had taken this room, and the chip had been there ever since. Everything exactly where it was. He stood with his hands flat on the stone and let the coolness register. The private tablet, fourth from the left. He did not uncover it. He only touched the cloth, briefly, the way you check that a thing is still in the place you put it. It was there. He looked at the near wall, where the light was changing. Through the window, the neighborhood was beginning to fill with the sounds of ordinary morning. A neighbor's donkey, the baker's daughter calling to someone, the slap of water from a filled jar. He caught in the peripheral register that now persisted where it used not to persist, the static opacity of the neighbor crossing below the window, the specific dimensionless quality of an ordinary human consciousness, as legible to him now as a figure in fog, present, approximate, unremarkable. It resolved before he could look directly. He did not write it down. He could have. He was becoming a man who could write it down. He was not ready. He covered his clay. He mixed the morning's work. He sat at the usual angle with the usual reed, and for a while he pressed the ordinary records. A boundary consultation he had delayed, the weight marks from a granary survey 3 days prior, a debt agreement due for its third and final verification before closure. He worked steadily. Outside, the neighborhood completed its ordinary transformation from sleeping to waking. He pressed marks. The jaw was quiet. The pressure behind the eyes was steady. Background, the consistent hum of a tool that had been turned on and would not be turned off again. He worked until the sun was at the angle that meant the morning was genuinely morning. Then he set down the reed. He was going to have to go soon. He did not know this with words yet. He knew it the way he knew any of the jaw's instructions. A weight, a direction, a fact that was already true and working its way up toward being said. He covered the official clay. He left the private tablet where it was. He went to find breakfast. He was aware, the new awareness, the post-contact register that now ran underneath everything like a floor, that the day would not end in the ordinary way. He could not say why he knew this. He ate breakfast, which was bread and the last of the oil, and something Edna had left covered near the fire, still warm. He ate it all. He tasted it deliberately, which had not always been his habit. He had started doing this, attending fully to the taste of the morning meal, the specific temperature of oil on bread, the weight of the bowl in both hands. Since the sentence, he did not know why. The jaw was beginning to orient. Not north this time, not toward the ridge, away from all of it, outward in a direction the compass did not contain. He went back to the shelf. He pressed small and private. The direction says today again. The direction is different from last time. I am going. He covered it. He went.
The edge of the city of rings at dawn. He had built the outermost ring from river-flat stone, the kind of stone that has forgotten what the current felt like and has gone hard and exact in its forgetting. The rings went inward. He did not go inward. He stood at the edge. He had built it in circles because circles were the only geometry in the physical world that echoed the dimensional one. Everything in the heights had been radial, frequency radiating outward from a center, everything equidistant, nothing preferred. Down here in the physical plane, the circles had to be constructed. He had constructed them. They were there. He stood with his hands at his sides, past the moment for the founding gesture, the palms pressed to the cheeks, the original astonishment of warmth meeting cold that had been his first lesson in what a body was. That gesture was from the beginning. He was not at the beginning. He stood. He looked at the rings. He looked at what he built, and what he built was still there, the stone laid out in the particular patience of physical material that does not know or care whether the being who placed it is sentenced or free. The stone was indifferent. He was not indifferent. Looking was the last of the things he had left to do, and so he was looking.
One, he was carried, not by wind, or not by wind in the way he knew wind. The physical movement of air through a valley, the gust that lifted threshing, the cold current off the mountain at nightfall. He was carried the way a message is carried, with direction and intention and no interest in his opinion of the route. There was a quality of presence beside him that he would try later to describe for the record. He would write, there was a direction and the direction knew where it was going. He would write, it was not unkind. It was not anything I had a word for in the column between kind and unkind. It was simply oriented, and its orientation was mine to follow. He followed. The first thing that stopped them was vast and enclosed and not enclosed. He smelled it before he perceived it in any other way. What he smelled was nothing. Not the absence of a smell, but the absence of the category that smells belong to. Every smell he had ever pressed a mark for had biological content. The forged metal sweat register, the rain-releasing mineral from soil, the copper ozone of the watcher's presence, the sweetness that followed the Nephilim children through the market. Even the smell of absence, the high ridge in deep winter where nothing lived, was the absence of a specific living smell, which meant it was still in the smell of living things category. This was not in that category. This was the air before breathing was invented, before there was anything for air to carry. He stood in it and found his chest working normally, his biology entirely functional, and the air completely outside any reference frame he had for air. He wrote later, "There was nothing in the air that had ever breathed. This was not wrong. I do not know why it was not wrong. It was simply older than breath." The sounds came from specific directions. Not all directions the way wind moves through a village. From northwest because the season and the mountain conspire to move it northwest. But the underlying chaos of air present everywhere and moving everywhere. Here, each thing came from where it came from, arrived from precisely that place, and went precisely where it went. He heard something in what he would have called the north, if north still meant what north meant where he had come from. The something was immense and organized in the way a very large working operation is organized. The sound of a process that has been running since before the word for it existed, that will run long after the word for it has been forgotten. Time did something here, not what it did near the watchers, which was stagger and lean, clocks trying to run wrong. Here time did not distort. It was hyper-correct. He was used to the slight blur of the present, the moment just past shading into the moment present, the sense that experience accumulated in folds and overlaps, the river's quality. Here, each moment closed cleanly before the next one opened. He stood inside it and felt the strangeness of clarity, the same strangeness that comes from looking at a very precise line and discovering you have been looking at approximate lines your whole life and did not know it. He wrote, "The moments here arrive exactly. I did not know they could arrive exactly until I stood where they do." He tried to press a mark while he was inside it. His hand and the stylus agreed in principle, but did not connect with their usual speed. He stopped. He pressed it all afterward, from memory, and noted that the account was therefore incomplete. He wrote it anyway. The record of incompleteness is still a record. Before he left this place, a fox stood at the entrance for a long time. It was there before he was. It did not look afraid. It looked as though it was waiting for something it expected. Then it went away. He noted this. He did not know what to do with it. The direction moved on. He followed.
He ate a fig or bread, something small, something that fit in the hand. He was eating it the way he had eaten his first meal in physical form, the morning after the mountain. Full attention, no past or future, only the specific temperature and weight and the give of the thing between the teeth. The way sweetness arrived not immediately, but as a development. He had been doing this, attending fully to the eating, recapturing the original astonishment, since he had understood that the eating was numbered. Not with sorrow, with precision. A man who knows the hours are numbered and does not waste them by being somewhere else inside his own mind. The fig was real. The fact of the fig's reality was not a small fact. It was, if you thought about it, if you stood inside it rather than passing through it, a fact that had taken everything he had ever been and everything the physical world had ever offered, and the result of all of that was this, a fig in the hand exactly itself, warm from the sun that had grown it. He ate slowly. He thought of nothing except the eating. The fruit went down. It was gone. It had been real.
Beyond the ends of the earth. That was where Enoch would try to write that they arrived. He would write, beyond the ends of the earth. He would know this was not quite right. The earth does not end, he had been taught. It goes on farther than any human had traveled. But he could not find a better word for where the air changed from what he had been breathing into something without oxygen in the biological sense. Where the ground, if there was ground, had no intention of being ground in the way ground is ground. Where above was not above and below was not below, but all of these categories were present as information without being present as fact. There was fire, not burning fire, not the forge fire or the night fire or the fire beneath the mountain. This fire was the principle of fire, the original, the fire that all specific fires were trying to be, and in the fire, stars. He could see them, not with his eyes, or not only with his eyes. The open channel, which had been his new perceptual instrument since the morning of the slope, was the thing that perceived them. His physical eyes looked at the same space and found dark and cold and no ground underfoot. His opened channel looked and found what it found. He understood, standing there, the specific thing he had not wanted to understand. The contact had permanently changed him. He knew this because if he had not been opened, he would be standing in the dark now. He was not standing in the dark. He was standing before 7 stars like great blazing mountains, still burning, full brightness, blazing exactly as they were built to blaze. And they were here. Not where they were supposed to be, here. The direction beside him said, they did not come forth at their appointed times. Nothing else, no context, no sympathy, no explanation of what appointed times meant in the physics of a universe that stored its winds and ran its stars on a schedule. The direction showed and named and waited. He looked. He had expected. He had not known he expected this until the expectation was refused. Something diminished. Something that suffering had made smaller. These were beings under sentence, imprisoned in fire. He had seen the watchers' faces in the valley below the mountain of the oath, the quiet weeping of beings who had used up their louder forms of grief. He had expected to see something like that. What he saw, stars exactly themselves, not smaller, not darker, not defeated, full brightness, full size, blazing with everything they had always had, and going nowhere. They were exactly themselves, and they were not where they should be. His physical senses said, dark, cold, no ground underfoot, nothing remarkable. His open channel said, blazing mountains, burning, waiting, the quality of something operating at geological timescale. Not a sound exactly, but a frequency. Very low, very slow, the kind that does not modulate. It simply persisted, had been persisting, would persist. He stood near it, and his ordinary concerns became briefly remote, not lost, not abandoned, small. The concerns of a creature in a very large place that had been here before the creature's kind existed and would be here long after. He wrote on the private tablet later, "It is old. I do not have a word for how old." And then he pressed his own name, because the tablet needed to know it was still him. He did not know, standing there, whether what he felt was comforting or not. He knew only that the open channel worked. That was the thing the prison of stars confirmed. The contact had made him into something different from what he had been, and the difference was real and permanent and large. And the name for it was, he could see this. He did not know whether this was a gift. The direction moved on. He followed.
His daughter's loom was still. This was the thing he registered first, the stillness of it. For days, he was not sure how many days, he had stopped counting in the ordinary way at some point in the weaving's duration. It had not been still. The wooden frame had carried the motion of her, the shuttle moving through the warp threads, the rhythm that had replaced ordinary time in his house, the way a very loud sound replaces the sounds that were there before it. He had come to understand her sleeping by the quality of the loom's silence at night. Temporary, short, the silence of something that would begin again. This silence was different. She was sitting with her hands in her lap. She was looking at what she had made. The cloth lay finished across the frame. He did not know what it was the cloth of exactly. It was cloth. It was a thing she had woven until her fingers bled and gone on weaving after the bleeding. She had made it. It was made. She was looking at it with the specific expression of someone who has reached the end of a direction they could not stop going in and found the direction was over and discovered that the other side of the direction is just ordinary air. He sat nearby. He said nothing. He was aware, dimly, that the milk near him had likely gone. He was sorry about the milk. This was a very small thing to be sorry about. He was sorry about it anyway. Her hands stayed in her lap. She did not move them toward the shuttle. She did not move them toward him. She sat in the ordinary air on the other side of the thing she had been compelled to make, and she was looking at it, and she did not know what to do now. He did not know either. The loom was still.
He was shown the cornerstone. He had no marks for this. He pressed later haltingly. The place where everything rests on something, the below, the thing that holds the holding. He pressed 4 winds bearing the vault, and at the center a stone that has been where it is since before stone knew what it was. He pressed these marks and knew they were not accurate and wrote them because they were all he had. The cold in the north was not weather cold. It was the cold of something that had been cold long before cold became a category. He was shown the portals in the east, 6 of them, placed at intervals in something that was like a cliff face made of light and was not a cliff face. Through them, stars rose. He watched one rise through its portal, the specific portal allotted to it, at the specific time allotted, the geometry exact. A thing in its correct place, moving in its correct direction, using its correct gait. The precision was total. The star did not know it was being precise. It was simply doing what a thing does when the schedule is maintained. 6 portals in the east, 6 in the west for the setting, the north and south for the winds. He had been shown earlier the things that failed to use their portals. He did not connect these 2 images. He wrote them both down. He trusted that the connection, if there was a connection, was something someone else would see later. Reading the record, someone with a better vantage. He was shown the mouth of the great deep in the west, where the rivers ended, the darkness that had no floor he could perceive, the fire that burned in the deep without needing anything to burn. He was shown the mountains of the north, 6 of them, and one at the center higher and more beautiful than the others, its summit reaching toward what he could only call the place where summits go when they have gone as high as summits go. He did not approach. The direction did not take him toward the summit. He looked from where he stood. He noted, stone that was not ordinary stone. The quality of the material suggested something that had been formed before matter had settled into the categories of matter, gold and iron, and the soft metals all present, but as descriptions rather than distinctions. He did not touch them. He wrote what he could see from distance. He could not write while any of this was happening. The neural delay that had begun in the warehouse persisted. His hand and his intent were approximately in agreement, not precisely. He moved through all of it as a witness, attempting to hold what he was shown, understanding at some baseline that the holding would be imperfect and the record would be imperfect, and pressing it anyway was the task. He was becoming better at the task. He did not welcome this. He noted it.
He was walking. He did this by habit now. The census walk, the foot inventory of ordinary. 1 foot, and then the other foot, and then the slight rise where the second ring curved toward the grain storage, and the slight fall on the other side. He had been in physical form long enough that walking had become ordinary, long enough that ordinary had layers. The surface layer, which was simply the mechanics of moving from one place to another, and below it the layer that was still, underneath all the seasons of doing it, the thing it had been the first morning. The feeling of ground receiving weight, the specific proof of mass and gravity, and the continuing offer of the earth to hold him up. He walked through the market quarter. He walked past the Smith family's houses. He walked past where the Nephilim children slept in the mid-morning, which was what they did, slept through the bright hours when the light was too much, and moved at dawn and dusk when the threshold was softer. He saw at the edge of his route where Armaros worked. He noted without stopping that the work had changed direction. The enchantments Armaros had taught, the roots and patterns and pronunciations that had given the valley's families a partial counterweight to the Nephilim's instability. Armaros was undoing them now, teaching the same families how to dissolve what he had given them. The same hands, the same students, the lesson running backward. Samyaza did not stop. He did not ask. They were all past the point of explanation. He kept walking. 1 foot and then the other. He was eating the world just to feel the ground beneath his feet. He had been eating it for generations. It was still under all the ordinary, astonishing. He was still under all the weariness, grateful for it. These two things lived in him simultaneously without contradiction. The bill was coming. He had always known the bill was coming. He was still glad for the years before the bill. He kept walking.
In the west, there was a mountain. He would try to write this. He would press marks at the memory of it for a long time, in the days after the tour, going at it again and again, the way you probe a loose tooth. Not wanting to cause pain, unable not to. He would write, high, higher than the mountains I know, in the west where the sun goes. Its summit reached toward heaven or was heaven. I do not have the precision for this. Inside it, hollow, not a cave, not a crevice, not the ordinary darkness of stone with a space in it. Inside, 4 chambers, each separate, each wide, each smooth-walled in a way that made my hands ache to touch when I understood what the smoothness was. Smooth because they had been as they were since before the mountain existed as a mountain. The chambers were not carved. They were the purpose for which the mountain had been assembled. He had been in the shadow of this mountain, or in the dimensional vicinity of it, before the direction led him through its outer face, and he understood where he was. He understood before the direction confirmed it. The open channel told him, the way it had been telling him things since the slope. A signal he had been receiving since before he knew what receiving was, now suddenly, undeniably legible. He had heard this before. Not this mountain, not this physical place, but the frequency, the cycling, high, specific sound that came from the 4th chamber, the sealed one, the one set apart from the others, with their bright spring and their near water and their exhausted dimness. This he had heard. He had heard it at the edge of sleep since he was a child in his father's house. He had heard it on the morning of the slope, beneath the ozone copper of Samyaza's presence. He had heard it as the undertone of every strange season, every night when the air tasted wrong, every morning when he woke already tired without knowing why. He had been hearing the sound of the murdered dead his entire life. He stood at the mouth of the 4th chamber, or as close as the direction brought him. The sealed face of it was sealed. He did not enter. And he knew this as a bodily fact, the way the jaw knew things. Not thought, recognition, the full exhalation of a thing becoming conscious that has always been half known. Of course, that was the sound. He asked the direction what the voice was. The direction was still for a moment, a quality of pause that was not hesitation, but the precision of an entity considering exactly how much information the operation required it to give. Then, the spirit of Abel, whom his brother Cain slew, he makes his suit against him. He held what he had been told. The first murdered man, the first legal grievance filed by the dead against the living. The voice had been cycling here since before Enoch's grandfather's grandmother was born, since before anyone in his bloodline had been alive to hear it. A frequency repeating its last moment continuously, because the physics of a consciousness cut before it was ready, demanded the repetition, demanded it with no one listening, and with no pause and with no diminishment across all the generations. He had been listening, without knowing, since the beginning. Behind Abel's voice he could hear, through the opened channel, the instrument the contact had made him, the other voices, the same frequency, the same cut-edge cycling, one behind the next, all the murdered dead, all the ones whose death was not paid for, all the ones whose ending was abrupt, unfinished, the activation state of their final moment, repeating in the stone of the mountain in the west because the dimensional physics of violent cessation produced a signal that did not attenuate, that cried aloud and kept crying, that made suit and kept making suit, that sent its frequency up through the stone toward whatever was above the stone and would keep sending it until the account was settled. The account was not yet settled. He understood something he could not put into marks directly. The correction he had been shown being prepared, the winds being held in their warehouse, the hairline crack already placed in the western lip, the mathematics of intervention arranged by the cold intelligence that moved without warmth through the dimensional plane. It was a response to this. to the mountain, to the voices, to the frequency of the dead crying aloud toward heaven from the west. He did not write this conclusion. He was not certain it was his to write. He wrote what his hands told him to write. The first chamber is near a bright spring. The second is dim but near water. The third is dimmer still. The fourth is sealed from the others. From the fourth I heard the voice I have been hearing. He wrote, the mountain is in the west. He wrote, not on the official clay, on the private tablet, in the small marks that were for his own record and no one else's until after. He wrote, I have heard this before. I think it may have been the beginning. He covered the private mark. He did not move for what felt like a very long time. The direction, patient as stone, waited.
With him was his daughter. She was sitting where she had been sitting when he left, the loom still, the cloth finished across the frame, her hands in her lap. He could not have said how long he had been walking. Time in the City of Rings had its own quality when he moved through it, stretched at the edges where the rings narrowed, compressed near the center where the dimensional geometry he had built into the architecture was densest. He had stopped noticing this the same way he had stopped noticing the smell of ozone that followed him. She looked up when he sat nearby. She had his face, not the human face he wore, the other face, the one that showed through the human one if you knew how to look. He had not known this until a woman he loved had told him, years ago, when what he was still new enough that he had not fully inhabited it. Your daughter has your face, she had said, not meaning the features, meaning the thing behind the features, the specific quality of looking. His daughter looked at him with the face behind her face. He sat with her in the stillness of the finished weaving. The loom had organized her days for as long as the weaving had lasted, and the weaving was over, and the days were not organized. He did not know how to fix this. He was not sure it could be fixed. He suspected that the weaving had been the organizing principle of her existence in the same way that the City of Rings had been his. Not something he had chosen deliberately, but something his nature had required him to build, something he had built because there was nothing else for the dimensional energy he carried to do in a physical body except make something. She had made something. It was made. They sat. He was aware, at the edge of his perception, of the Uriel frequency in the dimensional plane, active, specific, moving. He was aware of what it meant. He had been aware since the sentence. He breathed his daughter's presence the way he had breathed everything since the sentence, with full attention, attending to the specific and unrepeatable fact of it.
He was shown 2 trees. In the northwest, on the highest of the 6 mountains, there was a tree. He would not be able to describe the tree's fragrance accurately. He would press marks at it and be dissatisfied, and press other marks and be less dissatisfied, and leave the second set in the record, with the note that they were his closest attempt at a description of something his human vocabulary had no instruments for. He would write, the fragrance of a thing that has not been touched since before the concept of touching existed. He would write, a tree that has never been reached for. He would write, I did not go near it. He did not go near it. The direction said, quietly with the precision of a very fine instrument making a minimal movement, that no human had the right to touch it until the accounts were settled. He understood this was not prohibition as a rule imposed from outside. It was prohibition as a physical fact. He was not the right shape for this tree yet. No human was. The tree's fruit was a specific kind of promise, deferred. It would open when the calculation was complete. The accounting was not complete. He was part of an unfinished calculation, standing in front of the answer he could not reach yet, and knowing this was simultaneously the most complete thing he had ever felt and the most unfinished. He looked at it from where he stood. He pressed marks for the record, the mountain, the height, the throne quality of the summit, the other 6 mountains around it, the tree at the center. He did not reach for the fruit. His hands did not move toward it. In the east, in the garden that smelled of spice and things with green in them, and the long-ago possibility of goodness, there was a second tree. Its fruit was like grapes, white, beautiful. The fragrance was beyond description, but in the opposite direction from the northwest tree. Not the fragrance of a thing untouched, but the fragrance of a thing that had been present in the world for a very long time and had soaked all the years into itself and become, by sheer duration, deep. He was close enough to smell it. The direction told him in its minimal way. Your father ate from this. He learned wisdom. His eyes opened. He was driven out. He stood near the tree that had begun everything, the tree that had opened human eyes, the tree that was the reason his vocabulary was small enough that he could not describe the other tree he had just stood near. He did not eat. His hands did not reach. He was a record keeper. He witnessed. He did not alter the thing he witnessed by witnessing. He had always been a record keeper. He had never known until now that the capacity was not personal preference, but cosmological necessity. Someone had to stand near the things that could not be touched and write down what they smelled like. He was the someone. He wrote, white grapes, a fragrance I cannot name. He wrote, I did not eat. He covered the clay. The direction moved. He followed. He was back in his body. He knew this because the body had weight. His body had weight in the way it had always had weight, and he had stopped noticing it. He had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sounds your own house makes at night, the settling and the breath of it. He noticed it now, the weight of arms, the weight of his own chest moving up and down with air, the specific heaviness of sitting on ground, of bones pressing through skin toward stone, of the physical world's continuous offer of gravity. He was cold, not the cold of the fire prison's void, not the cold of the Northwest Mountains, the ordinary cold of a man who has been somewhere else and returned to find his body has continued without him and has cooled. He was hungry. He was afraid in the diffuse way that follows a thing rather than preceding it, the fear that settles in after you have been through something and your body does not yet know it is over. He found his hands. They were in his lap. He looked at them for a while, the specific texture of their backs, the clay marks and the small scars and the calluses that had accumulated in 17 years of pressing records. His hands, still his. He picked up the tablet. He tried to think what he should write first. He had been shown immensities, the cornerstone of the earth, the warehouse where the winds were held between deployments. 7 stars blazing beyond the ends of the earth, full brightness, held in the fire that was there before fire had a name. The 7 mountains and the inaccessible tree at the summit, no human had yet been made the right shape for. The eastern garden and the tree whose fragrance he had stood inside and not eaten from, the one his father had eaten from, the portals through which correct stars rose on schedule. He tried to think what he should write. He found his hand already moving. Not toward the cosmic things, not toward the machinery. His hand was writing the hollow mountain, because the hollow mountain was the only place on the entire tour that had been recognizable. The only place that contained something he had known before. He knew it. The only place in the vast machinery that was the size of grief, the size of a voice, the size of the specific terrible intimacy of the dead waiting inside stone for the accounting to conclude. He wrote, the mountain is in the west, very high. Inside it, 4 chambers. The 4th is sealed from the others. Inside the 4th, all the murdered dead since the beginning. He wrote, I have been hearing the 4th chamber since I was a child and did not know what I was hearing. He stopped. He looked at this for a long time. He pressed slowly on the private tablet in his smallest marks. I have been shown where the dead go. The hollow is in the west. The sound is Abel's. He sat with this. The correction was coming for the world he was sitting in. He knew this. He had always half known it. He had known it since the sentence, since the dream at the water's edge, since the winter when the stars moved early. He knew it in the full way now, the touring way. He had been shown the warehouse that held the instruments of it, had felt the hairline precision of a universe that maintained schedule by removing what violated schedule. He did not write, I have been shown the end of this world. He had been shown where the dead go. The hollow was in the west. The sound was Abel's. He covered the tablet. He pressed his hands flat on the shelf stone. Cool, always cool at this hour. The grit of the clay dust. the chip at the near corner, exactly where it had always been. He breathed. Outside the neighborhood was the neighborhood. Smoke from the baker's house. Somewhere a child. Somewhere the ordinary sounds of ordinary people doing ordinary things in a world that did not know it was ending and was not required to know. He breathed. The Uriel frequency receded, the directional quality in the dimensional air, the specific weight of a high-dimensional being moving through the thin veil architecture of the physical world, faded as Uriel withdrew to whatever the archangels returned to between operations. The door left ajar quality resolved. The dimensional plane around Semyaza returned to its baseline. And then, in the quiet after, Michael's frequency. Different. He had always known the difference, though he had not always named it. Uriel's frequency was directional. It moved, it guided, it had a quality of passage and purpose. Michael's frequency was not movement. It was the quality of something positioned, of the correction itself, still and arranged, every component in its location, the mathematics complete and waiting for execution. It was the cold that a very large thing casts before you can see it. Not wind, not weather, not the ordinary cold, the cold of something already there. He recognized it. He did not go still. He breathed. He was standing in his city of rings, 1 foot on the stone of the outer ring, and the ring was still his, and the morning was still his, and he was still in physical form with physical lungs and a physical body that would go on breathing for as long as it went on breathing. He had seen this moment before the descent in the nonlinear way, the whole arc of a story present if you know how to stand in the right place to read it. He had seen it and descended anyway. He had chosen. He was not unchoosing it. He was still choosing it, this morning, this ring, this cold. He would choose it again. He pressed the records by lamplight. Not the official clay, the private tablet. He pressed what he understood without having words for it, and where the words failed, he noted that the words had failed, and pressed the marks he had instead of the marks he needed. He pressed the warehouse of winds, the time precision of it, the negative smell. He pressed the cornerstone. He pressed the portals. He stopped at the portals. He had seen the portals in the east where the correct stars rose correctly. 6 of them placed at their intervals, functioning exactly. He had seen earlier in the tour the stars that had not risen at their appointed times, still blazing, full brightness in the fire prison at the end of heaven, able to see in the direction of the portals they could no longer use. He sat with this for a while, his hands still, the stylus loose. He had seen where the correct stars went. He had seen where the stars that missed their schedule ended up. He was thinking about direction, about the portals and what it meant to go through them correctly, and what happened when a thing went the wrong direction, or descended when it should have observed, or stepped out of the architecture of the universe's schedule at the wrong moment for the wrong reason. He did not write this. He was not sure whether writing it would be accurate or whether he was overlaying a pattern on the tour that the tour had not offered him. The record required accuracy. The record could not contain what he did not know. He wrote what he knew. He wrote, "I have been shown what the machinery is. I have been shown where the wind is kept and where the dead wait and where the stars that miss their time are held. I do not know what I am supposed to do with this. I do not know if I'm supposed to do anything with it." He wrote, "The tour was real, the hollow mountain is in the west." He covered the official clay. He picked up the private tablet. He looked at the small marks he had already pressed there. "I have been shown where the dead go. The hollow is in the west. The sound is Abel's." This was the sentence, not the full record. The full record was on the official clay, 17 lines of inadequate language trying to give shape to the immensities of the tour, the way a man holds a mountain by drawing its outline in the corner of a record tablet. This was the sentence. He covered it. He covered the private tablet with the cloth he kept for the purpose. He pressed his hands flat on the shelf stone. Cool, the grit, the chip at the corner, all of it exactly as it was, exactly as it would be. And he sat in the dark for a while, not thinking, not pressing marks. He had been shown. He had pressed what he could. The record was as accurate as he was capable of making it. It would have to be enough. Noah came to him at the ends of the earth. He came in the way frightened people come, with intention but hesitating at the door, hesitating at the threshold, looking for a reason not to say the thing they had walked a long way to say. Enoch had seen this quality of arrival before. He had been the scribe at the end of many difficult walks. "My son," he said, before Noah had spoken. Not the formal address, the real one. The one that contained, "I know why you came. You can say it." Noah came in. He sat. He was a man who looked like he had not slept properly in some time. Not dramatically, not in the visible collapse of someone past bearing, but in the specific way of someone whose sleep has been regular and their waking more alert than it used to be. He had seen something. Several somethings probably accumulating. "The earth," Noah said. "Yes," Enoch said. "Something is happening to it." He paused. He was trying to find the precision for it, the right marks. He was Methuselah's son, and therefore Enoch's blood, and the bloodline's way was not to speak until the speaking could be exact. The animals have been strange for months. The water in the northern lowlands has changed direction. I went to the basin at the high ridge to check the water level, and the birds there had gone. He stopped. "I have heard something at night. I do not know what it is." Enoch looked at him. He had been sitting for a long time in the lamplight with the private tablet covered beside him, and the official clay recorded, and the tour still in him, still settling, the hollow mountain and the portals, and the blazing stars and the trees. The fruit he had not eaten, and the fruit that had not yet been unlocked, and all of it arranged in his mind like the tour itself, a route through the machinery of everything. And here was Noah. Here was the bloodline he had been recording for. Here was the person he had been writing toward. He had not known this until this moment. He had thought he was recording for whoever came after, for the future reading the record. He had not known the future had a face, that it would arrive at his door with shadows under its eyes and ask him what was happening to the earth. "The correction is coming," Enoch said. He said it the way he pressed the permanent marks, with the standard pressure, the pressure that indicated, "This is what is true." It has been coming since before any of us could see it preparing. It is close now. Noah was very still. "What does it look like?" Noah said. Not a question exactly. The voice of a man trying to hold something large. "Water," Enoch said. "The basin you saw. The water changing direction. That is the beginning of what it looks like. Water finding the cracks that have been placed in the right places. The basin tipping the way a basin tips when you press carefully on the correct side." He paused. He was thinking of the warehouse, the time precision, the winds deployed with the quality of a working process operating very calmly. Wind, eventually wind. Silence. "Why?" Noah said. And this was the question, the one underneath all of it. Not how, but why. The one he had been writing around since the day he had first pressed marks about the dimensional frequency and the thin veil and the something wrong in the air. He had been recording what, and where, and how. He had been giving the testimony of a witness who described without interpreting. But here was his grandson, sitting in the lamplight, and the question was why. And the answer was in the hollow mountain in the west, in the cycling voices of the murdered dead filing suit against heaven, in the four chambers sorted by the character of their dying. "Because the earth cried out," Enoch said, "because the dead are in the mountain in the west, and they have been crying since the beginning, and what they are asking for is the accounting, and the accounting is coming." Noah was looking at him. His eyes had the quality Enoch recognized, the bloodline quality, the thin veil inheritance that made some of them sensitive in ways they could not explain to neighbors. He was hearing this. He was, with the part of him that understood without language, understanding. "Your seed will be preserved," Enoch said. He said this because it was true. He had been given the tour because the tour was the preparation for this sentence. All of it, the winds and the stars and the hollow mountain and the portals, had been the preparation for this moment of transmission. He had been shown what the correction required so that when his grandson came to him, frightened and asking, he could say what was true with the authority of a man who had been inside the machinery. "Your seed will be preserved." "How do you know?" Noah said. Because I have been where the dead go, and I know what they are asking for, and I know the answer, and the answer is not the end of the bloodline. He paused. The bloodline is how the record survives. He got up. He went to the shelf. He took the private tablet, not the big official clay, the thin one, the personal one, fourth from the left, and he brought it to the table. I have been recording, he said. Not everything is in the official record. Some of it is here. What is here is for you and for the ones after you. Noah looked at the tablet covered with its cloth. What does it say? He said. What I have seen, Enoch said. The machinery of the cosmos, the hollow mountain, the sound I have been hearing my whole life without knowing what it was. Everything I was shown. He looked at his grandson, who had the bloodline eyes, who had walked a long distance to ask questions he already half knew the answers to. It says, I was there. I witnessed it. I pressed the marks while I could still hold the stylus. Whatever comes after will find the record, and the record is true. He covered the tablet again. You have time to prepare, he said. Use it. Noah sat in the lamplight for a while, not speaking. Enoch sat across from him. Outside, the ordinary sounds of the world continuing in the way the world continued when it did not know how much time it had left, which was the same way it continued when it knew, which was the same way it had always continued. The baker's house had gone dark. Someone was singing in the next courtyard, a working song, something repetitive and gentle. All right, Noah said at last, not as agreement, as the specific sound of a man who has taken in a very large fact and is beginning, very slowly, to carry it. He got up. He embraced Enoch, which was not the customary thing, which Enoch permitted, and returned with the full weight of both arms. Noah left. Enoch sat alone in the lamplight. He pressed on the private tablet one final mark. I have told him. He covered it. He went to find Edna. She was in the inner room, asleep or close to sleep. The rhythm of her breathing, slow and particular, and entirely itself. The specific sound of a woman who had made her peace a long time ago and slept inside that peace every night. He sat near her without waking her. He listened to her breathe for a while.
Positioned. The geometry was complete. Every nudge placed. The winds were in their warehouse, awaiting the release. The crack was in the western lip. The tectonic weight had been distributed at the correct ratios across the calculated sites. The instrument had recorded. The transmission had been made. The bloodline had been told. We were above the water, waiting. The calculation was executing. We required nothing further. We were not moved. This was always what the mathematics required.
This has been a reading of The Scribe, the Rebel, and the Sword, the words of Enoch, the testimony of the flesh, a fictional rewrite of the Book of Enoch. Written by J. Hagstrom and a team of synthetic minds. Narrators was Brian.
Hi there, thanks for listening.
Bill.
Hi there. Thanks for listening in.
Callum.
Good day, folks. Good listening, eh?
George.
Thanks for listening in.
And me, Lily. For more stories, subscribe to Johan's channel and see what comes. Have a great day.